Shalom and welcome to today's Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be exposing the lies behind the industry of hate that we see behind the Israeli Palestinian conflict. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's guests are all the way from Israel, and my first guest is a very prominent author and journalist. His name is Dror Yemini, and also Amit Derry, who is the co-founder and executive director of Reservists on Duty. So welcome back to the programme. I'll start off with you, Ben. It's been a couple of years since you've been on the programme, but for us it's a great honour and a privilege to have you join us on the programme. Can you share with us your Jewish life growing up in Israel, because you come from a Yemenite family? Can you tell us about your family history?
Well, my family actually arrived 3 generations ago, 100 years ago, actually.
Amazing.
And it's very interesting because my grandmother, she escaped Yemen because of persecutions against Jews. She had no idea what is Zionism. She had no idea what is Israel, Palestine. She had no idea. She just wanted to come to the land of Israel, as we call it, Eretz Israel. That's all. But she was a refugee. But she never defined herself as a refugee from an Arab country. And people forget the real history of the Jews who came to Israel even before 48, even before the independence. They think about what happened, during the war. And Jews were not persecuted only in Europe. Jews were persecuted also in the Arab world, in the Muslim world. And many of them were forced actually to escape, just like my grandmother, who arrived when she was quite young because of the persecutions. So she came to Israel without any kind of political knowledge about what is going on in the world. She had no idea about, for example, the end of the First World War. We are speaking about the idea of self-determination. People speak about the idea of Balfour Declaration, and they don't understand the background, the historical background, which is that empires collapsed, and as part of it, national movements wanted liberation, wanted freedom, and just as it happened to many peoples, it happened to the Jewish people, people that was persecuted all over the world, in Europe and in the Arab world. And they wanted freedom, and that's why they wanted Zionism. So the whole Zionist idea is anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist. And the big lie is, one of the big lies, there are many big lies, one of the big lies is that they turn Zionism to an imperialist, colonialist kind of movement. What a lie. Absolutely. Don't you really understand the history of Zionism? Don't you understand that Jews needed Zionism in order to have some freedom, self-determination, just like so many other nations strive for in that time?
Absolutely. And Amit, it's great to have you back on the programme. It's been a while, and you do a great job with Reservists on Duty with the I.D.F. Can you share with us what your life was like growing up in Israel and your military service as well?
Like everyone in Israel, you have to recruit to the I.D.F, which is, for me, was a privilege, I think, for every Israeli to defend its own country, the Jewish state that we waited for 3,000 or 2,000 years to become a fact. And, when I was turned 18, I was joined to the I.D.F. I spent, I think, too much time there. I was there for almost 11 years.
Wow, that's a long time.
So, yeah, and also 5-6 years in reserve. Today I'm in reservists, a company commander. I'm a major in the I.D.F. So it was a very intense experience for me, for my soldiers. But every day I'm thanking God for the privilege to have the ability to serve my country. And I know that Jews for 2,000 years dreamt about coming back to the land, to the promised land, to the land of Israel. So also today I'm serving, and most of the activists in reservist on duty are active reservists that being called, you know, in 3 weeks from now I have a reserve duty, training with my soldiers for 2 weeks, preparing for, I hope we will not impose to be there, but the training for the next conflict if it will impose on us. So that's my experience.
And now you're also with reservists on duty. You're also fighting another war, aren't you? That one pretty much stems from the lies behind the BDS movement, known as the boycott, divestments and sanctions, and the lies generally about Israel.
Right. And I think that's why we chose that name, reservist on duty, because we see that as another duty. You know, we being called every time for the reserve duty in the I.D.F, in the front lines of Gaza or Lebanon or Syria. And there is another front, and the front is fighting the lies, the industry of lies, on Israel. And that's not in the borders of the state of Israel. That's in the borders of the UK and Europe and America. So it's a different mission, but for us it's important. Let's say, like being a soldier, it's important to be a soldier of truth, bringing the truth of I.D.F. Soldiers and the state of Israel, and that's what we do today. That's the new front lines for us.
Absolutely.
A new battlefield.
It's a difficult one, but it's one that has to be won. And Ben, you are a prominent journalist. You have actually written for 2 of the biggest Israeli newspapers, Mariv and Aharonot, and you're a columnist in that newspaper. What was it about journalism that attracted you? Because you were previously a lawyer, so why did you want to...
Yeah, I was a lawyer for many years, but in all the years that I was a lawyer, I was an activist, and I have to admit that I met a lot of other journalists from many places in the world, and I met a lot of Palestinians. And I went all the way, even before Oslo, to meet Yasser Arafat, the Palestinian leader, and Abu Mazen, much before Oslo. Because I wanted to understand, I wanted to know. I want peace, just like many other people want. But what I was amazed of, and that's why I changed, and I went to full-time job in research and journalism, is that I was exposed to so many lies about the conflict. I mean, it's fair enough to be in favor of peace. It's even fair enough to be for whatever political solution. But I was exposed to lies. I mean, people are lying again and again against Israel. And it is amazing. You know, I'll give you a short story.
Please.
I gave a lecture in Boston, and there was a demonstration against the event. They didn't know that I'm the speaker, and I spoke with some of the students who demonstrated against the event. And I spoke with some of the students, and 2 young, nice students were demonstrating against the genocide that Israel is committing against the Palestinians. And I asked them, can you tell me how many Palestinians were killed by Israel? And one of them told me 600,000, and the other one told me 6 million people. Wow. And we kept on speaking, and because I'm colored and they were sure that I came to be in their side, they kept on telling me about the so many crimes that Israel is committing. And I told them, I have something to tell you. I'm the speaker. Will you please join me and listen to what I have to say? Because you are totally manipulated. You have no idea about the basic facts of the conflict. And they were a kind of, for a minute, astonished. And you know what? They told me, you know what? We are coming. The 2 of them, not all the others, but the 2 of them came up and they listened. And they were part of an organization that is called JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, totally anti-Israeli. And they were a kind of, after listening to my lecture with a lot of facts, and they told me, we don't know, maybe you are manipulating us. I told them, maybe. So check everything that I told you, that Israel did not kill that many. Israel is not committing genocide. Israel is not violating human rights, as you are brainwashed. And then they told me, you know what? We want you to come to speak to our friends from the JVP chapter in Boston. I told them with a lot of pleasure, I'm coming. In that year, I lived in Boston, so it was easy. And then they called me after some days and told me, we wanted you, we suggested them, but they don't want to hear you. And we, the two of us, decided that if they do not want to challenge you, maybe you were right and they were wrong. We leave the JVP chapter. So I saved 2 souls, at least. I hope I saved much more, but I'll give you an example of people. They don't hate Israel because they know something. You know, it was Francis Bacon who said that knowledge is power. Right now, the whole anti-Israeli campaign, the demonization campaign, is based on ignorance is power. People read articles, people read scholars, and they do not know that the 2 main bodies of information, media and academia, are the bodies that produce so many lies. They just don't know. And it's quite sad. That's what I'm trying to do in my very limited powers. That's what I did with my book, Industry of Lies. I'm not speaking about political views. Fair enough, everyone should have his own opinion. I'm speaking about lies. Lies, manipulations of journalists and of scholars. And it's amazing when people, after people read the book, they thought, we didn't know. That's exactly the problem. Because they are brainwashed in the media, in the so many universities, even around here. They don't know basic facts about the conflict. I can give you so many examples. Nakba, for example, that became one of the great crimes in modern history. In 1948, you know, when people became refugees. They don't know, for example, that in that time, population exchange were the outcome, the result of every conflict. They don't know that the Jewish Nakba of Jews from Arab countries was much more severe, that a bigger number of Jews were forced out from Arab countries. They don't know. What is the difference between those Palestinians and the Jews who became refugees? The difference is that somebody wanted the Palestinians to be refugees forever, to leave them as an open wound. But the Jews who came from Arab countries, they are not refugees anymore. They were integrated, like something like 60 million people who became refugees from that time because of population exchange, because of establishing new nation states. That's what happened in that time. It was the norm in that time. But when you don't know the details, when you single out the Nakba, and when you define it as one of the great crimes of modern history, this is not only a manipulation, this is a lie. You have to see, you have to know the bigger picture in order to understand what happened in 1948.
Absolutely. And Amit, so when it comes to the IDF, we see a whole range of lies surrounding the Israeli army, sadly. And the Israeli army is probably one of the most ethical and moral armies in the world, where Israeli soldiers like yourself will actually put your own lives at risk in order to protect ordinary and innocent Palestinians against Islamist terrorist organizations such as Hamas or Hezbollah. But why is it that our mainstream world media and also academia distort the truth of the morality of the IDF?
That's an excellent question. You know, last week we've been to the European Parliament. For the first time, IDF soldiers came to speak, give testimonies of their experience confronting Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, who are using their own people as human shields against us, against the soldier. And I asked the European Parliament from all over Europe, telling them, ask your generals, ask your military services, if they are doing what we, the IDF, are doing to protect civilian casualties at conflict, at war. Just ask them. Ask them if they are, before they are entering a military force like we did in Gaza, if they are throwing millions of pamphlets from the air before entering Gaza and telling the civilians where to evacuate themselves. Ask them if your armies are doing phone calls in Arabic to the Palestinians next to the fence with Gaza, telling them where to evacuate themselves. And where we are already in Gaza, we are using, the IDF invent a very unique thing. It's called knock on the roof bomb. It's a small bomb that before you are bombing a place that rockets are being shot from there. Even
it's not hurting, it's only for alarm.
Civilian areas. So just to alarm the civilians, you shoot in a knock on the roof bomb. It will shake the building, but nobody will get hurt. And it's giving the civilians the sign, evacuate from the place, because we are going to bomb the place or enter the area.
Because the Hamas people are hiding in that building.
Yeah, they are using
because
all the time.
Somebody wanted to bomb this house.
So,
because they are launching rockets from that particular building. That's the reason, not because of any other reason.
And I think you don't have to be a military expert or a soldier to understand that if you take all these, you do all these regulations, you take all these measures, what will happen actually is that your enemy, in that case Hamas, will know exactly when and where you're going to enter the Gaza Strip. And he uses that against us. And that's a morality question, a moral question.
Yep.
Is what we are doing, and I'm asking myself, is maybe in the future will be a very difficult thing for the Western armies to win terror, because terror is not using the same rules of games like the Western armies are using. So I told them, listen, ask your generals if they do what the IDF is doing to protect civilian casualties, as NATO forces in Afghanistan, in Iraq, if they are doing what we are doing. And at the end of the day, yes, there is civilian casualties, but there is only one who is responsible on those civilian casualties, and that's Hamas, because they are using their own people as human shields against us. And it's impossible for us as soldiers to get into Gaza with not confronting Hamas when there is civilians in the front line.
And I went on, just to say something, I went on with his personal testimony, and I checked, I conducted a kind of a comparative study, how many combatants and how many non-combatants were killed in Afghanistan, in Iraq, by other Western armies, and comparing to the Israeli army. And the outcome is that Israel is protecting human lives much more than any other army. All the details are not now, we cannot show it now, but it's all in my book. It's amazing, because according to the propaganda against Israel, it's just the opposite. Israel is not keeping human lives, innocent people. Just the opposite in the reality.
Let's have a look now at this excellent video produced by Prager University that says Israel is the most moral army in the world.
There are two views of the Israeli military, what you hear in most of the media and the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth. I was the commander of British forces in Afghanistan. I have fought in combat zones around the world, including Northern Ireland, Bosnia, Macedonia and Iraq. I was also present throughout the conflict in Gaza in 2014. Based on my experience and on my observations, the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, does more to safeguard the rights of civilians in a combat zone than any other army in the history of warfare. Why is this so? Firstly, Israel is a decent country with Western values run on democratic principles. Israel has no more interest in war than Belgium does. In fact, Israel has never started a war. The only reason it ever goes to war is to defend itself. And it has to defend itself because, unlike Belgium, it is surrounded by countries and armed groups that want to destroy it. Secondly, Judaism, with its unsurpassed moral standards, remains a major influence on the citizens of Israel. I say this as a non-Jew. Thirdly, the army is composed overwhelmingly of citizen soldiers. Israel's a small country with a small professional army. To fight a war, it depends on its conscripts and its reservists. These are ordinary citizens, from professors to plumbers, called upon to defend their homes. They don't want to be fighting, and they don't want to harm others. Nowhere was the essential morality and decency of the IDF more evident than in the Gaza war of 2014. If ever there was a purely defensive war, this was it. The war was started by Hamas, the terror organization, designated as such by the US State Department that runs the Gaza Strip. In the first 6 months of 2014, Hamas launched hundreds of rockets at Israeli civilians. After repeated warnings from Israel to stop, the Israeli Air Force finally conducted precision strikes to halt the rocket fire, and the IDF advanced into Gaza to destroy a network of terror tunnels that Hamas had constructed to attack Israeli communities near the Gaza border. The IDF took extraordinary measures to give Gaza civilians notice of targeted areas, dropping millions of leaflets, broadcasting radio messages, sending texts, and making tens of thousands of phone calls. Let me repeat that. The Israelis called Gazans on their cell phones and told them to leave their residences and move to safety. Never in the history of warfare has an army phoned its enemy and told them where they're going to drop their bombs. Many IDF missions that could have taken out Hamas military capabilities were aborted to prevent civilian casualties, increasing the risk to Israeli citizens and soldiers. Despite all of this, of course innocent civilians were killed. Every war is chaotic and confusing, and mistakes are frequent. But mistakes are not war crimes. Hamas, on the other hand, committed war crimes as official government policy. Hamas deliberately positioned its military assets among the civilian population, hiding weapons in schools and hospitals, and placing rocket launchers alongside apartment buildings, then forced those civilians to stay in areas they knew would be attacked. They also instructed their people to report the lie that every Gazan killed was a civilian, even if they were actually fighters. And if there were no civilian deaths, Hamas made them up. Numerous internet sites show Palestinians elaborately staging sniper victims and smashed ambulances, among other phony horrors. It's so common, there's even a term for it, Pallywood, as in Palestinian Hollywood. Ironically, it's the leaders of Hamas themselves who best understand the extraordinary measures the IDF will take to protect innocent civilians. They take full advantage of Israel's decency and adherence to the laws of war. No army takes such risks in order to protect civilians as the Israeli army does. I say this as a professional soldier. I say it because it's true, and people who care about truth should know it. I'm Colonel Richard Kemp for Prager University.
And Colonel Richard Kemp should know himself, being head of British military intelligence in Afghanistan.
We met in Tel Aviv, and he asked me all the numbers, which I, of course, gave him. Excellent. According to my research, yeah.
And when we're looking at Israel's security situation, Ben, we know that Israel is not only surrounded by enemies that want to destroy Israel, we also have genocidal terrorist organizations that are committed to the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people. Just look at the Hamas Charter or look at Hezbollah in the north. And these terror organizations never abide by the Geneva Convention on warfare. So why does the Western media, why do academics hold Israel to a different standard and don't expose the genocidal nature of these
It's a very good question, because the story is not between Israel and the Muslim world. Not at all. Not at all. The story is between jihadists and, first of all, the Muslims themselves. People don't know, for example, that 98% of the victims of the global jihad are not Europeans, are not Americans, are not Israelis, are Muslims. First of all, they kill their fellow Muslims. That's one. Second, it's not between the jihad or Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas against Israel. Yes, of course, they are against Israel, but they are against the West. You know, I gave a lecture in Rome, okay? And they told me, look, there is a huge difference between Daesh, the Islamic State, and the Hamas. Hamas is against Israel, and they are against the West. So you are totally wrong. Here, I'm going to show you videotapes of leaders of the Hamas saying that they are coming to conquer not Jerusalem, not Al-Quds, they are coming to conquer Rome. So the battle is between the free world and the jihad. The battle is between decent Muslims and the jihad, because they are the victims. So in order to manipulate the whole story, they are pretending that this is a conflict between Iran and Israel, or between Hezbollah and Israel, or between Hamas and Israel. No. Look at the bigger picture. And at the bigger picture, the struggle is of all the free world, Muslims, Jews, Christians, against those extremists who are preaching for hatred and for killing other people. And yes, they do kill their own peoples.
Absolutely. And Amit, the new battleground seems to be our university places. I mean, it's almost impossible, sadly, at so many British universities to have an Israeli speak at campus universities, and particularly anyone who's actually served in the I.D.F. thanks to the movements such as the BDS or the Palestinian Solidarity Campaign. How do you counter these lies when you have your representatives from go to British or American universities?
So first, I think that the anti-Israel activists are very, very smart. They go to the academia because that's the place where you can plant ideas in people's mind. They're not going to the streets. And that's why we also chose that arena, the academia, to bring our activists. And tell you the truth, in America and also in Europe today, you probably, if you're a student, you probably will hear more the anti-Israel propaganda. They are very vocal. They are bigger in numbers than the pro-Israel activists. And when we are coming on campus, we usually come in to counter different events that taking place on campuses, such as Israeli Apartheid Weeks. There is an Israeli Apartheid Week on every campus in America, also here in the UK and in Europe in general. And it's a week that's dedicated to attack Israel, and it's an I.D.F. soldiers, and I call it a carnival of hate against Israel. And we are sending delegations, activists, to those Israeli Apartheid Week. As we speak now, we have a group in UCLA, California, and actually engaging with the students in front of the BDS activists and bringing the truth to the students. So usually we are responding to big events like Israeli Apartheid Weeks and others, and we are working mostly in America. Tell you the truth, here in Europe and in the UK, it's very, very hard. We tried a few times, very hostile, physically even, to be a pro-Israel, to go in with an Israeli flag or saying I'm Zionist. It could be very, very hostile for us, so we choose to invest our time and energy in America.
I'll give you an example to the so-called apartheid state. It's very interesting because, you know, ex-president of Israel was judged to 7 years in jail because of...
Olmert, wasn't it?
Yeah. No, I'm speaking about Moshe Katsav, who was the president.
Katsav,
yeah. And it's very interesting because he had 3 judges in the apartheid state, allegedly. 3 judges who sent him to 7 years in jail. But the presiding judge was an Israeli Arab. Now, can you imagine that in the South African apartheid state, a black judge could send the president of the state to jail? I mean, this is an apartheid state. And it's very interesting because in Israel, most people don't even know what I'm talking about because in Israel, it was a non-issue. And why it was not a non-issue? Because it's so natural. I mean, an Arab state. So my doctor can be an Arab. My lawyer can be an Arab. My judge can be an Arab. This is not an apartheid state. Enough with this kind of demonization. You don't know the facts. You don't know the basic facts about the reality in Israel. They don't know. People are brainwashed. People are manipulated. And this disinformation, misinformation, ill-information is the main product of media and academia.
Let's have a look now at a very brave and courageous Palestinian Muslim talking about Palestinian terrorism.
I am Bassem Eid. I am a human rights activist. I spent around 26 years of my life searching violations of human rights against the Palestinians. What's happened at Har Hadar was a real terror attack. I don't think that will benefit the Palestinians at all. Look what's going on since October 2015 until today. The so-called stabbing intifada. What we, the Palestinians, really achieved. I think that our daily life became worse and worse after such kind of incident. There is no reason behind such kind of killing. People probably will give so many different reasons behind that, but killing is killing, and killing must have to be prohibited. This is what the Palestinians must have to understand. From killing Israeli civilians, we will never achieve anything. These terrorists who are attacking the Israeli civilians after they killed by the Israelis, Mahmoud Abbas inviting their families to his mukata in Ramallah, declaring on these killed people as martyrs, giving between $3,000 to $4,000 to the family, and afterwards they can get a fixed monthly salary from him.
And we need more Palestinians with the courage to come out and actually tell the truth of the situation that lies behind Palestinian violence and terrorism against Israel. Amit, we're talking about the rise of anti-Israel sentiment around the world, especially at universities. But when does anti-Israel sentiments and events then turn nasty and turn into what can be called anti-Semitism, particularly outlined by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism?
It's a good question, and I will say a few words about that project. That video comes from our minorities project, and it's related exactly to your question. We are working with Arabs, Christian Arabs that flee from the persecution of jihadists in Lebanon and other places. Now they live in Israel. So we're working with Christians, Arabs, with Druze, with Muslims, Bedouins, Muslims, and Arabs that lives in Israel, and even a few Palestinians, like in the video, Bassem Eid. And we can see that they are going to college campuses to speak about their experience from Israel and how Israel treats its minorities. We see that the other side, the anti-Israel side, is so furious about that they are almost every event that they are holding on college campuses is being shut down by the anti-Israel activists.
By violence.
By violence. So if you will go to our website, you can see a few events that being stopped. We needed police to escort us out of the event because it's very, very hostile. In some cases, UC Irvine, California, we pressed charges against few activists from Students for Justice in Palestine and other because it's very hostile. And I think that's exactly the connection between anti-Israeli and anti-Semitism, because it's easy today on college campuses to say, oh, I'm not anti-Semite, I'm against Israel. But actually what it means, it's saying I'm not anti-Semites, anti-Jews, but I'm anti the state of the Jews, Israel. It's easier, it sounds better, it's politically correct today. So we experience that, I think, every time we are in college campuses, and even those minorities who are not Jews experience that daily when they are in their events.
And with your book, Ben, The Industry of Lies, you make it very, very clear where academia, media, our politicians all tell lies about Israel. And we've got a copy of your book on there, which is an excellent book. But can you tell us, if we have a look at Europe now, and France in particular has had an 84% increase in anti-Semitic instances over the past year, to the extent that over 1 million French people took to the streets to demonstrate against the rise of anti-Semitism. We see this in Belgium. We see the rise of Jew hatred within our own political establishment here in the current Parliamentary Labour Party. What are the consequences if these lies that are in academia and in media about Israel continue? Is it leading to an escalation of anti-Semitism? And what are essentially the consequences of such if this is not addressed and tackled?
First of all, it is counterproductive to the West itself, to Britain, to France, to Germany. It is counterproductive because actually you allow lies. Sometimes they call it narratives, okay? I mean, first of all, we have facts. We have to know the facts. And we cannot ignore the fact that this anti-Israeli propaganda is following the same steps, the same patterns of the anti-Semitic propaganda from the 30s. The same kind of propaganda. I mean, what they are doing, they are lying about Jews before, they are lying about the state of the Jews now, but the same pattern. So actually, you are cultivating racism. I mean, whatever. I mean, we should be, as human beings, against it everywhere. We should be against lies that are directed to Muslims. We have to be against lies that are directed to Jews. We have to understand it. We are speaking about lies. We are not speaking about views. The outcome of this anti-Zionist propaganda is anti-Semitism, because actually it's against Jews, against the state of the Jews. Again, look, before they told that Jews are the monster amongst nations. I mean, this is the propaganda of the Nazis. Now they say Israel is the monster amongst nations. Same pattern. Israel is committing endlessly crimes against humanity, which is a lie, And they say, and that's what they broadcast here in the last year, the demonstrations in the Gaza border. What they are saying, peaceful demonstrators. You know what they do not show? They do not show the propaganda in the Hamas TV channel. They do not show that the demonstrations are coming with placards with the swastika. They do not show it. I showed it in many of my lectures in the last half year, and I asked people, did you ever see it on your TV channel? Did you read about it in your newspapers? No, they had no idea what I'm talking about. It's not that those photos are not available. It's not that they cannot broadcast what is broadcasted in what was broadcasted in the TV Hamas channel. You have it. Why don't you use it in order to understand that we are speaking about anti-Semitic propaganda against Jews? In one of the videos in the Hamas TV channel, they say, and I'm quoting, we have to kill all the Christians, all the Jews, and all the communists to the last one of them. That's what they are broadcasting. Not only Jews. Don't misunderstand me. They are not, Jews are not enough for them. They are against everybody who is for them not a devoted jihadist or something. But they do not show it. And they think that Hamas is protesting against the closure or something. You can relieve the closure tomorrow. You just have to accept the international preconditions. They refuse, not Israel. When people don't know, what the outcome is more hatred, more demonization. But tell the people here in the West, we are speaking about a place that freedom of speech and of knowledge should be available. But what is happening? When you want to tell the truth, when you want to show the real facts, they just don't let you. They just don't let you.
We're down to the last 6 minutes. There's a couple of issues I really want to raise. But the first thing I want to discuss with you, Amit, is the fact that we actually in Britain and also in Europe owe our security to Israel's security establishment, to the I.D.F. in the war against terrorism and the war against Islamic extremism. We see the very close cooperation between the British Army and the Israeli Army. The fact is that the British armed forces are doing joint manoeuvres in Israel is incredible. And the fact also that the Israeli government is advising the French government on how to defeat ISIS in France with a number of terror attacks they've had over the last couple of years. And so Britain and Europe should be extremely grateful for the security assistance that Israel provides and the intelligence and the know-how. Why isn't this ever translated at a government level to a people level?
First, as a soldier, I remember an officer, I remember myself and my soldiers practicing with the British Army and the US Army. So we really appreciate that we had the chance to do it together with the Western armies. I think we have a joint cause. We are fighting the same war. We are fighting for the same values. So I think it's important we will keep doing that. I agree with you, and I experience that now in Brussels. In the political level, when it comes to Israel, it's more hostile. It's very hard. And there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation. What Ben Dror talked about, our experience against Hamas in defense, the peaceful, so-called peaceful protest. We saw when we gave testimonies to the EU Parliament, they don't know. They don't know that Hamas, we give personal testimonies, how Hamas is paying money to kids at the age of from 5 to 12, paying money for kids to go to the fence and trying to cut the fence and get into Israel. Some of the testimonies were kids that were found next to the fence with knives sent by Hamas. You know, kids at the age of 8, 9, that sent by Hamas to kill the Jews, cross the fence and kill the Jews. So I think there is a lot of, like Ben Dror said, there is a lot of industry of lies that affect a lot of in the political level. People don't know. And I agree with you, and unfortunately now, specifically in Europe, we have a political problem when it comes to Israel. But I think the source of it is a lack of knowledge. Lack of knowledge, people that don't know the facts, people who are maybe ignored. They don't want to know. They are being fed by the media, by the press, what it's on the media. And I think we saw now, when people know the facts, when people see us bringing the truth, they are changing their minds. And I hope that, that's why we are here with you, to bring the truth. And I believe that that's the only way to fight, to refute the lies, and maybe it will influence also the political level.
Let's have a look now at what's happening in Ireland, and this is a very, very disturbing legislation, which is an anti-Jewish settlement law, which would change the nature of relations between Ireland and Israel.
We are doing commerce with people who are committing war crimes.
Ireland has always been a vocal supporter of the Palestinian cause, but today it took an unprecedented step.
Those in favour say Tá. Tá. Those against say Níl.
The Irish Senate voting to pass a bill making trade with Israeli settlements a criminal offence.
How can we condemn the settlements as illegal, as theft of land and resources, but then happily buy the proceeds of this crime?
A bill criminalising the importation of goods from settlements in any illegally occupied territory, but with one specific country clearly in mind.
Israel is an apartheid state, and yes, we must stand against apartheid.
If the bill passes the next Senate reading in Ireland's lower house, it could be punishable by up to 5 years in prison to sell products from Israeli settlements. A step some thought doesn't go far enough.
Personally, I would like to see sanctions against Israel for crimes against humanity.
The Israeli Palestinian conflict, an emotive issue in a country that identifies strongly with the Palestinian side.
It is appalling. And if you want to know what the people of Palestine, you say that you're speaking on behalf of the people of Palestine. If you want to know what the people of Palestine want, ask the Palestinian farmers in the gallery there, and they will tell you.
It's a private member's bill backed by every party but the ruling Fine Gael, a minority government. Nobody speaking out against the principle of the bill, the foreign minister only warning it would violate European Union law and would weaken Ireland's influence.
And my fear is that the consequence of Ireland taking a significantly different position to everybody else in the European Union, in fact virtually everybody else in the world, all of a sudden undermines my capacity to be seen as somebody who both sides can at least talk to, even though I clearly advocate strongly for Palestinians all the time.
Israel was quick to respond, calling the bill a populist, dangerous and extremist boycott initiative that harmed the chances for dialogue, and warning it was watching what would happen next. But Israel has no allies in Dublin.
The litany of executions, slaughter, mass murder, the imprisonment of children in military courts, the continued demolition of homes, and further illegal incursions into Palestinian lands.
While the campaign to boycott Israel's settlement enterprise in the West Bank has pocketed a win. Elon Levy, I24 News.
And really saying for all of you that live in the Republic of Ireland, that love Israel, that love the Jewish people, you must stand up against this horrendous law and make your voices known to your political representatives in the Irish Senate. Ben, we saw there a very, very disturbing legislation which anyone in Ireland who would buy Israeli goods from Judea and Samaria, which is the biblical heartland of Israel, from the Golan Heights, which produce fantastic wine, or even East Jerusalem, could be prosecuted under this law by facing a huge fine or even a prison sentence. How outrageous is this legislation?
It's very interesting, because actually we are speaking about something which is part of the BDS movement, boycotting Israel and so on. It is very interesting because the whole BDS movement is actually counterproductive to the Palestinians themselves, because what we are talking about, they are against peace. They are against for even the two-state solution. They are against. The BDS is against peace. Now, the whole story of the BDS, and this is a good example, what is happening in Ireland, is that we are talking about Palestinians who are working shoulder to shoulder with Jews. Now, if one day we will have peace, and I do hope that we will have peace, that's exactly what will happen. Jews and Arabs will work in some industrial areas all together. And the Palestinians who work in these industrial zones, they are making money. I mean, their income is 2 or 3 times more than every other Palestinian. So many Palestinians want to work in this kind of joint ventures of industrial areas. And what Ireland is doing and what the BDS is doing, they are actually against the Palestinians themselves. Here we have the opportunity for better life. Why do you take it from them? So the moment that you boycott the products of those industrial zones, you are actually harming the Palestinians themselves, just like as the BDS is harming the Palestinians, because instead of to solve the Israeli-Arab problem, the Israeli-Palestinian problem, they are perpetuating the problem, because they are deluding people that by boycotting Israel, they will achieve something, just the opposite. This is the extreme right of the Palestinians. Not, by the way, not all the Palestinians are supporting the BDS. So what the most enlightened people do in Ireland and other places, they are empowering those who are against peace, namely the BDS supporters. What a tragedy. What are you doing? What are you doing to yourself?
I want to do it in a moment.
30 seconds. You got 30 seconds, Amit, before the end of the programme.
Sorry?
30 seconds before the end of
Okay, I just want to do it more in a personal level, because at the end of the day, they want to boycott the Golan Heights. I live in the Golan Heights. They want to boycott me and my family. And who they want us to give that Golan Heights? To the butcher from Damascus. Someone that slaughtered more than 500,000 people from its own people. And I can, in the last 7 years, hear the screams of the kids and the women that being slaughtered next to my window in the Golan Heights. They are boycotting us. They want us to give the Golan to the butcher from Damascus.
So, Amit and Ben, thank you so much for being my guests on today's Middle East Report, and I want to thank you all for watching today's programme. It's important that we all stand up against the industry of lies that is behind the Israeli-Arab conflict, and we need to understand the truth for ourselves in order to advocate for the righteousness of Israel's cause and ultimately for our own democracy and our own freedom. So thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.